They laughed when Micah Moore talked to the walls. They stopped laughing when the walls answered back. Micah Moore mopped the courthouse floors the way a man prays, slow, deliberate, and without asking anyone to watch. The mop glided over marble that never remembered his name, only the echo of his footsteps and the quiet rhythm of his breath. Every morning at 5:12 a.m., before the judges arrived, before the lawyers rehearsed their lies in mirrors, before the flags were straightened and the law pretended to be clean, Micah was already there. He talked while he worked, not muttering nonsense, not rambling. He spoke in full sentences. Objection, Micah said softly, turning the mop. Speculation. Counsel has not established intent. His voice carried no humor, no madness, only calm. A bailiff once paused behind a column, coffee steaming in his hand, listening. He smirked and shook his head. Poor guy, he whispered to no one. Lost his mind. Micah continued. If the witness claims ignorance, then the burden shifts. And it does shift, Your Honor, whether the prosecution likes it or not. The mop swished. Water darkened the stone. Micah's eyes stayed on the floor, but his mind stood somewhere else, behind a podium, hands resting on polished wood, a courtroom holding its breath. He knew the shape of silence. He had learned it young. By 8 o'clock, the courthouse filled with sound, heels clicking, briefcases snapping open, laughter sharp as glass. People passed Micah without seeing him. He was part of the building, like the vents or the exit signs. Necessary, invisible, replaceable. Except for the talking. They heard that. Hey, Professor, one young attorney called out, grinning as he passed. Winning any imaginary cases today. Laughter followed him down the hall. Micah did not look up. He had learned another thing early in life. When people mock you, they are not asking questions. They are making declarations about how small they need you to be. A clerk named Denise stopped near the water fountain, lowering her voice. He does that every day, she told a colleague. Talks like he's in court. Sad, really. Probably thinks he's a lawyer, the colleague said. Or used to be one before, you know. They did not finish the sentence. They never did. People preferred mystery when it made them comfortable. Micah turned the mop bucket, wringing water with practiced hands. His knuckles were thick. Scarred. Hands that had known work, not applause. Let the record reflect, he murmured, that laughter does not equal truth. No one was listening. On the third floor, courtroom B prepared for the trial everyone was waiting for. The state versus Harrington. A corruption case so large it had pulled in politicians, developers, donors, and judges by proximity alone. Millions missing. Evidence stacked like a fortress. Careers poised to rise or fall. Micah knew the case. He knew it better than most of the people about to argue it. He had been cleaning this courthouse for 7 years. 7 years of late nights and early mornings. 7 years of empty courtrooms where sound carried differently, where words spoken to no one stayed longer. He had listened, not by hiding, by existing. Lawyers rehearsed out loud when they thought no one was there. Prosecutors paced and practiced openings. Defense attorneys argued with ghosts. Judges spoke their doubts to the ceiling. And Micah remembered everything. Memory had always been his curse and his weapon. He did not forget patterns. He did not forget contradictions. He did not forget the way people's voices changed when they lied to themselves. Your witness contradicts the financial timeline, Micah said quietly, scrubbing near the jury box. And contradiction is where truth begins to bleed. A young intern stepped inside, froze, then laughed nervously. Man, you scared me, he said. You practicing for something? Micah looked up then. His eyes were steady, brown, deep, not lust. Yes, Micah said. The intern blinked. For what? Micah considered the question. The honest answer would take too long. It would require history, pain, fire, loss. So he gave a simpler truth. For the moment, he said. The intern shrugged and left, already forgetting the encounter. By midday, word spread as it always did. The janitor was at it again, talking to himself, playing lawyer. By afternoon, laughter grew louder. By evening, the courthouse emptied, and Micah was alone again with the echo of his thoughts. He stood at the defense table in courtroom B, not physically, but with his spine straight and his hands folded behind his back. He imagined the judge's face, the jury's eyes, the way the room would feel when a truth no one wanted finally stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, Micah said to the empty benches, you are about to be asked to believe something convenient. But convenience is not evidence. His voice did not shake. Because this was not fantasy. This was rehearsal. And Micah Moore did not rehearse for things that would never happen. Not anymore. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning, thin as a hairline fracture in glass, easy to miss unless you knew exactly where to look. Micah Moore felt it before he saw it. He was emptying trash cans outside courtroom B when the prosecutor's voice carried through the half-open door. Confident. Smooth. Too smooth. Confidence, Micah had learned, was often the mask fear wore when it thought no one was watching. The paper trail is conclusive, the prosecutor said. Funds moved, shell accounts activated, signatures verified. The defendant could not have been unaware. Micah paused, not because of the words, but because of what was missing. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a distant sound. The mop leaned against the wall, forgotten. No, Micah whispered. You skipped it. Inside the courtroom, the defense attorney rose slowly. An older man. Expensive suit. Tired eyes. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, the defense said. Before we proceed, I'd like clarification on the origin of Exhibit 14. The prosecutor hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. But hesitation was loud to a man trained to hear it. It was submitted by the Financial Crimes Unit, the prosecutor replied. And prior to that, the defense pressed. The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Micah closed his eyes. Here it comes. The prosecutor adjusted his glasses. The document was compiled from multiple sources. Bank records, audits, third-party reports. That's not an origin, the defense said calmly. That's a collage. A murmur rippled through the room. Micah felt a strange tightening in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. This was the moment where a careless answer could collapse an entire structure. Most people didn't notice these moments because they were quiet. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't shout. They whispered. The prosecutor recovered quickly. The underlying records were lawfully obtained. The judge nodded. Proceed. And just like that, the crack was sealed over. Or so it seemed. Micah exhaled slowly. The moment had passed, but it had left a mark. He resumed his work, though his mind stayed inside the courtroom. He replayed the exchange, dissected it, turned it over like a stone in his palm. Exhibit 14 had no spine. Without a clear origin, it relied entirely on trust in institutions, in process, in authority. And authority, Micah knew, was the most fragile thing in any room once questioned properly. Later that afternoon, 2 junior attorneys stood near the elevators, whispering. That was weird, right? One said. The exhibit thing. Doesn't matter, the other replied. The judge already bought it. Case is airtight. Micah pushed his cart past them. Airtight cases don't rush, he said softly, almost to himself. The attorneys stared at him. What did you say? One asked. Micah stopped. For a moment, he considered apologizing. It would be easier, safer, invisible. But something in the air had changed. Airtight cases don't rush, Micah repeated, his voice steady. They let questions breathe. The attorneys exchanged looks. Okay, one said slowly. Sure, man. They stepped away, laughter trailing behind them like a shield. But one of them looked back. Just once. That night, Micah stayed later than usual. Courtroom B was dark except for the low glow of emergency lights. He stood at the prosecution's table, hands resting where evidence had been stacked hours earlier. Intent, Micah said quietly. Everyone wants intent. But intent is a story you tell after you already believe the ending. He walked to the witness stand. If money moved automatically, he continued, then the crime is not thought, it is design. And design always leaves fingerprints. Micah stopped speaking. Silence filled the room, thick and expectant. Then, from the doorway, a voice. Who are you talking to? Micah turned. Judge Eleanor Whitmore stood there, robe removed, handbag on her shoulder. Late 50s. Sharp eyes that missed very little. She had stayed behind to review motions. Micah felt no panic. Only awareness. Myself, he said. The judge raised an eyebrow. That much was obvious. She stepped inside, heels clicking softly. You work here? Yes, And you rehearse arguments in my courtroom? Micah nodded. Yes, Why? Most people ask that question with amusement or pity. Judge Whitmore asked it like she expected an answer. Micah met her gaze. He did not smile. Because words matter, he said. And they sound different out loud. The judge studied him. Not the uniform. Not the mop. Him. You're not disturbed, she said slowly. No, You're not pretending. No, Then what are you? Micah thought of his past. Of classrooms he never finished. Of doors that closed softly but permanently. Of nights spent reading case law under flickering lights, memorizing arguments that no one would ever ask him to make. He chose his words carefully. I'm prepared, he said. The judge did not respond immediately. She looked around the empty courtroom, then back at Micah. Be careful, she said finally. People don't like mirrors. She turned and left. Micah stood alone again. But the silence felt different now. He returned to his cat, hands steady, heart quiet. The crack had been small, almost invisible. But Micah knew something the others did not. Cracks do not heal. They wait. And when pressure comes, they decide what falls apart. By Wednesday, the laughter changed tone. It was still there, sharp, dismissive, careless, but now it carried something else beneath it. Curiosity, thin and uneasy. Curiosity was dangerous. It meant the mind had started asking questions it could not control. Micah Moore noticed it in the way people looked at him just a second longer before turning away. In the way conversations paused when he passed, then resumed too quickly. In the way the janitor who talked to himself had become the janitor who might be listening. That morning, Courtroom B was full again. The prosecution called its star witness, Victor Klein, senior forensic accountant, gray-haired, confident, dressed like a man who had never been doubted in a room full of people paid to doubt. Micah stood near the back, wiping fingerprints from the glass doors. Klein spoke clearly, efficiently. He walked the jury through spreadsheets, timelines, and flowcharts. Money moved here. Funds surfaced there. Shell companies folded into one another like paper birds. Based on my analysis, Klein said, there is no plausible explanation for these transfers that does not involve conscious participation by the defendant. The prosecutor smiled. The jury nodded. Micah felt the weight shift again. Not a crack this time. A hollow. Klein spoke well. Too well. His words were clean, polished, symmetrical. And symmetry, Micah knew, was often used to hide imbalance. The defense rose. Mr. Klein, you testified that the transactions indicate awareness. Correct. Yes. And that you reconstructed the flow of funds independently. Yes. Independently of what? Klein paused. Independently of outside influence. Micah's grip tightened on the cloth. That wasn't my question, the defense said. Independently of what data? A small frown crossed Klein's face. Bank records. Internal ledgers. Audit summaries. Provided by whom? The prosecution. There it was. A ripple passed through the courtroom. Subtle. Controlled. But real. Micah leaned back against the wall, eyes half-lidded, listening. So your analysis, the defense continued, was based entirely on material selected and organized by the same party seeking a conviction. That is standard procedure, Klein replied quickly. Is it, the defense asked, or is it convenient? The judge leaned forward. Answer the question. Klein swallowed. It is common. Common, the defense repeated. Not neutral. The prosecutor objected. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said. Move on. The moment closed. Again. But Micah felt the room record it anyway. Juries remembered tone even when they forgot words. During the lunch recess, the courthouse buzzed. Micah emptied bins, replaced liners, wiped counters. Conversations spilled around him like loose change. He almost slipped, a paralegal whispered. You saw that, right? Doesn't matter, another replied. They won't touch him. They don't need to touch him, a third voice said. They just need to make him human. Micah passed without looking at them. In the hallway near the judge's chambers, he paused to adjust a crooked painting. His reflection stared back from the glass frame, tall, dark-skinned, quiet. A man shaped by erasure. He thought of laughter. Laughter was rarely joy. More often, it was armor. People laughed at what frightened them, what unsettled the story they told themselves about how the world worked. A janitor belonged in one story. A thinker belonged in another. Micah had learned that the mind people feared most was the one they could not place. That afternoon, as he scrubbed the steps outside Courtroom B, a young woman stopped in front of him. Early 30s. Defense team badge clipped to her jacket. Her eyes were sharp but tired. You're Micah, right? She asked. He looked up slowly. Yes. She hesitated. I've heard you talk. He waited. In there, she added, gesturing vaguely toward the courtroom. You speak like you understand what's happening. Micah studied her face. He saw skepticism fighting something else. Hope, maybe. Or desperation. "I listen," he said. She nodded. "So do I." Silence stretched between them, the kind that invites truth or shuts it out. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Yes." "What do you think of Klein's testimony?" Micah did not answer immediately. He chose his words the way one chooses where to step on thin ice. "He believes his conclusions," Micah said. "But belief is not the same as independence." Her eyes sharpened. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Micah continued. "If you decide where to look before you start, you will always find what you expect." She exhaled slowly. "That's what I've been feeling." "Feelings are data," Micah said. "People just pretend they aren't." She stared at him, then laughed softly. Not mocking. Surprised. "You should be up there," she said, nodding toward the courtroom. Micah smiled faintly. "People don't invite mirrors to speak." She studied him one last time, then walked away. That evening, Judge Whitmore sat alone in her chambers, replaying the day. She told herself she was tired, that the case was complex, that nothing was wrong. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the janitor's face. Calm, certain, unafraid of being wrong. And she wondered, for the first time, whether the laughter echoing through her courthouse had been hiding something all along. Because laughter, she knew, often arrived just before silence fell. And silence, when it came honestly, was never empty. The fourth day of trial began with rain. Not the dramatic kind. Just enough to darken the steps, to quiet the city, to make people arrive with their shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing for something they could not name. Micah Moore arrived earlier than usual. The courthouse smelled faintly of damp stone and old paper. He liked mornings like this. Sound traveled differently when the world was wet. Words slowed down. Lies had less room to run. As he wiped down the council tables in courtroom B, Micah replayed the previous day in his mind. Not the testimony itself, but the spaces around it. The pauses. The deflections. The questions that circled truth without touching it. There was one question no one had asked yet. And Micah knew why. That question did not attack the defendant. It did not challenge the witness. It did not even threaten the evidence directly. It challenged the process. People avoided those questions because once you pulled on them, everything connected began to tremble. By mid-morning, the prosecution called another witness, a mid-level banking compliance officer named Laura Finch. Nervous. Careful. Her voice quivered just enough to sound sincere. Micah leaned on his cat near the side wall, eyes half closed. She described alerts. Red flags. Internal reviews. Emails sent up the chain. Yes, she said. The transactions were irregular. They triggered review protocols. And what happened after the alerts? The prosecutor asked. They were marked as resolved. Resolved by whom? Senior compliance. And did you personally verify the resolutions? No, Finch admitted. That was outside my authority. The defense rose. Ms. Finch, you said the alerts were resolved. Were they resolved correctly? Finch hesitated. I assumed so. Assumption is not verification, the defense said gently. Objection. Sustained. Move on. Micah felt it again, the question dancing just out of reach. He whispered it under his breath. Resolved based on what? The jury watched, attentive but untrained. They saw pieces. They did not see joints. During a brief recess, Micah cleaned the jury room. He wiped crumbs from the table, straightened chairs. The walls were thin. Voices leaked through. Something feels off, one juror said quietly. Don't overthink it, another replied. They have experts. Experts, Micah thought, were often just people paid to speak confidently. As he left the room, he nearly collided with Judge Whitmore. She was holding a file, brow furrowed. Micah, she said. He stopped. Yes, Your Honor. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, lowering her voice, she asked, Why do you stand by that door every day? Micah glanced toward courtroom B. The acoustics are better there. She studied him. You hear things others miss. Yes, That's not normal, she said. No, It's trained. The word hung between them. Trained by whom? She asked. By necessity, Micah replied. The judge nodded slowly. Tell me something. Micah waited. If you were asking the questions in this case, she said, what would you ask that no one else has? Micah did not answer immediately. He was careful. This was not a performance. This was a line. Finally, he spoke. I would ask who decided the alerts were resolved, he said. Not in name. In process. The judge's eyes narrowed. Explain. Every system has a moment where a human choice overrides an automatic one, Micah continued. That moment leaves a signature. Not on the transaction, but on the authorization. Silence. If you find that moment, Micah finished, you find the truth. Judge Whitmore said nothing. She nodded once and walked away. That afternoon, she returned to the bench with a different posture. Straighter. More alert. When the next witness began, she interrupted early. Counsel, she said, I have a question before we proceed. The courtroom stilled. Judge Whitmore turned to the witness. When an alert is marked as resolved, what documentation is generated to justify that resolution? The prosecutor stiffened. Your Honor. I'm asking the witness, the judge said calmly. The witness blinked. There should be an internal authorization log. And where is that log? The judge asked. The prosecutor shuffled papers. It wasn't included in discovery. The defense stood slowly. Your Honor, that log is material. A murmur spread through the room. Judge Whitmore's gaze hardened. It appears, she said, that the court has been shown outcomes without origins. Micah felt his pulse steady. Not excitement. Alignment. The judge ordered a brief adjournment. In the hallway, voices erupted. What was that about? She's digging now. This is getting dangerous. Micah pushed his cart past them, invisible again. But invisibility, he knew, was only a problem when you wanted credit. That evening, long after the courthouse emptied, Judge Whitmore sat alone in courtroom B. The lights were dim. The benches empty. Micah finished mopping near the front. Micah, she said quietly. He looked up. Were you always this patient? She asked. Micah considered the question. No, he said. I learned patience after impatience cost me everything. The judge nodded. Tomorrow, she said, I will ask for that log. Micah returned to his work. Because he knew something else no one was saying out loud yet. Once you ask the right question, the room never goes back to the way it was. And somewhere, someone who believed they were untouchable had just felt the floor shift beneath them. Power does not panic loudly. It tightens. Before this story continues, take 1 second. Tap like if you believe truth always finds a voice. And subscribe if you stand with the unheard. The next morning, the courthouse felt different the moment Micah Moore stepped inside. Not tense, controlled. The way a room feels after someone important has closed a door and decided what will and will not be discussed. Security stood straighter. Conversations dropped to whispers. Phones buzzed more than usual. The authorization log had been requested. And power, once questioned, always looked for a way to reassert itself. Micah moved through the corridors quietly, his cart rolling over polished floors. He did not rush. Rushing belonged to people afraid of time. He had learned to let time lean toward him instead. Inside courtroom B, the prosecution looked composed, but Micah could hear the strain in their voices as they spoke among themselves. Control was being performed, not possessed. Judge Whitmore took the bench. Before we continue, she said, the court will address the matter of the compliance authorization log. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, after extensive review, we have determined that the log in question was archived due to standard data retention policies. Micah felt a cold clarity settle in his chest. Archived was a word used to make destruction sound responsible. The defense was already on its feet. Your Honor, this is the first time we are hearing this. The log pertains directly to the legitimacy of the prosecution's evidence. Judge Whitmore's expression did not change. How long are such logs retained? The prosecutor hesitated. 7 years. And how old is the log? The judge asked. 4 years. The silence that followed was heavy. Micah closed his eyes. Someone had lied. Not loudly. Not foolishly. But carelessly. Then explained to the court, Judge Whitmore said evenly, how a document within its retention window was archived beyond retrieval. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. It was miscategorized. Miscalled, Micah whispered to the floor. The judge leaned back slightly. The court will take a short recess. Counsel will be prepared to provide a sworn explanation upon return. The gavel struck. The room erupted. Micah wheeled his cart into the hallway as attorneys clustered in tight knots, voices sharp. This is turning into a fishing expedition. She's overstepping. We need to contain this. Containment. That was the language of systems protecting themselves. As Micah wiped down a bench, he felt eyes on him. He looked up to see a man watching from the far end of the hall. Tall. Expensive suit. No badge. not courthouse staff. Power rarely wore uniforms. The man approached, smile smooth. "You're Micah Moore," he said. "Yes. I'm Daniel Reeve," the man said. "I advise institutions." Micah nodded once. "Congratulations." Reeve smiled thinly. "I hear you have opinions." "I have ears," Micah replied. Reeve chuckled. "Listen carefully, Mr. Moore. People like you survive by knowing when to be quiet." Micah met his gaze. "People like you survive by assuming others will be." The smile faded. "You're a janitor," Reeve said. "This isn't your arena." Micah's voice was calm. "Arenas don't belong to the loudest voices. They belong to the rules." Reeve leaned closer. "Be careful. Curiosity can cost you your job." Micah looked at the man's shoes, polished, expensive, spotless. Shoes that had never known this flaw. "I've already lost everything that could be taken quietly," Micah said. "What remains does not scare easily." Reeve stepped back, studying him. "You think you're important." "No," Micah said. "I think the truth is." Reeve turned and walked away. The recess ended. Back in courtroom B, Judge Whitmore returned with a different energy. Controlled, but sharp. "The court has reviewed preliminary records," she said. "It appears there were manual overrides applied to the compliance system." A stare. "Who authorized them?" the judge asked. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "We are still determining that." "Determine faster," Judge Whitmore said. "Because this court does not accept ghosts as decision-makers." Micah felt something shift behind his ribs. Not triumph. Responsibility. As testimony resumed, Micah watched the jury. They leaned forward now. Experts no longer felt omnipotent. Systems no longer felt neutral. Power was being dissected. And power, Micah knew, hated nothing more than being understood. That evening, Judge Whitmore found Micah in the hallway again. "You were right," she said quietly. Micah nodded. "It usually isn't one bad person," he replied. "It's a series of protected choices." She studied him. "Why do you know this?" Micah's eyes darkened slightly. "Because once, I trusted a system to protect me." "And it didn't," the judge said. "No," Micah replied. "It taught me instead." She looked at him for a long moment. "Tomorrow," she said, "someone will be named." Micah returned to his cart. Because naming was the most dangerous moment of all. Once a system reveals who made the choice, it must decide whether to sacrifice itself or expose the individual. And Micah Moore had lived long enough to know that silence was about to fall. Not the empty kind. The kind that precedes collapse. Names carry weight. Not because of the letters that form them, but because of what collapses once they are spoken out loud. If you believe justice should speak louder than power, like this video, subscribe, and stay with this story. Micah Moore felt that weight pressing down on the courthouse before the doors even opened. The building seemed to hold its breath, stone and steel waiting for impact. People arrived early, not to work, but to witness. Rumors moved faster than facts now, and everyone sensed the trial had crossed an invisible line. This was no longer about a defendant. It was about the system. Micah set his cart near courtroom B and listened as two clerks whispered nearby. "They say it was someone high up." "No way." "Of course yes. Manual override access is restricted." Micah wiped the same spot on the floor twice, buying time. Restricted access meant a short list. A very short list. Inside the courtroom, Judge Whitmore called the session to order. Her voice was steady, but there was no softness in it anymore. The tone had shifted from inquiry to judgment. "Before testimony continues," she said, "the court requires clarification regarding the manual overrides identified in the compliance system." The prosecutor stood slowly. His confidence had dulled, like a blade that had struck bone. "Your Honor," he said, "the authorization traces indicate that the overrides were executed under a senior clearance." "Define senior," the judge said. "Executive-level compliance authority." A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Micah closed his eyes briefly. Executive level meant policy. It meant intent wrapped in protocol. The defense rose. And who held that authority at the time? The prosecutor hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Counsel," she said quietly, "this court does not tolerate evasions disguised as caution." The prosecutor swallowed. The overrides were approved by Marcus Hale. The name landed like a dropped gavel. Marcus Hale, Chief Compliance Director. Trusted. Decorated. A man whose signature had cleared millions of transactions without question for over a decade. The room erupted. Micah stood very still. This was the moment systems feared most, not exposure of wrongdoing, but exposure of respect misplaced. The defense spoke carefully. Your Honor, Marcus Hale's authorization would imply institutional awareness. Yes, the judge said. It would. The prosecutor raised his voice. Your Honor, this does not absolve the defendant. It changes the narrative, Judge Whitmore said sharply. And narratives matter. Micah felt the air thicken. People were no longer breathing easily. When truth surfaced, it demanded space, and there was never enough room for everyone. During the recess, the hallway became a storm. That name never comes up. This goes higher. They won't let this stand. Micah leaned against the wall, eyes down. Daniel Reeve reappeared. His smile was gone. You've done enough, Reeve said under his breath. You're not part of this. Micah looked up. Neither are you. Reeve's jaw tightened. You think you're invisible. You're not. Micah nodded. I know. Reeve stepped closer. Careers will end today. Decide if you want yours to be one of them. Micah met his gaze without flinching. Careers end when they are built on silence. Reeve stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. Back in courtroom B, Judge Whitmore addressed the jury. You have heard testimony suggesting that key evidence may have been shaped by decisions outside the defendant's control, she said. This court will not ignore that. She turned to the prosecutor. The court orders the immediate production of all communications involving Marcus Hale relevant to this case. The prosecutor nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. Micah felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Not relief. Recognition. The truth was no longer alone. That evening, the courthouse emptied more slowly than usual. People lingered, waiting for updates, afraid to leave before the story finished telling itself. Micah stayed late, as always. Judge Whitmore remained in her chambers. Files were stacked around her like walls. When Micah passed with his cat, she called out to him. Micah. He stopped. Yes, Your Honor. She studied him carefully. Did you know this name would come up? Micah chose honesty. I knew the role would. She nodded. And if the truth goes further? Then it will, Micah said. Truth doesn't stop where it's convenient. The judge exhaled slowly. You understand what you've done. I understand what I've stopped doing, Micah replied. Being quiet. She watched him go, something like respect settling into her expression. Micah finished mopping courtroom B long after night fell. He stood where the defense table had been, then where the prosecution had stood. Power, he said softly to the empty room, relies on two things, complexity and fear. He straightened. When one is removed, he continued, the other collapses. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Someone important was about to fall. And for the first time since this trial began, Micah Moore did not rehearse. He listened, because the silence that was coming would not need practice. It would speak for itself. Fear does not scream. It calculates. The morning after Marcus Hale's name entered the record, the courthouse felt colder, though the weather had not changed. People avoided eye contact. Conversations ended when footsteps approached. Fear had learned how to walk softly. Micah Moore noticed it in the smallest ways. Hands shook when coffee was lifted. Voices dropped mid-sentence. People who once laughed now watched. They were no longer asking, is something wrong? They were asking, how far does this go? Inside courtroom B, Marcus Hale sat at the witness table. Not the man people expected. No arrogance. No anger. Just a calm face and careful posture. Gray suit. Neat tie. Clean hands. A man shaped by trust. Micah studied him from the side wall. This was the most dangerous kind of man. Not cruel. Not reckless. Just obedient to power. Judge Whitmore looked down at Hale. You understand you are under oath. Yes, Your Honor. The defense began slowly. Mr. Hale, you were Chief Compliance Director during the period in question. Yes. You had authority to override automated alerts. Yes. And you exercised that authority. Hale nodded. In accordance with policy. Micah closed his eyes briefly. Policy. The favorite hiding place of guilt. The defense stepped closer. Mr. Hale, did you personally review each transaction before approving the overrides? Hale paused. Just long enough. I reviewed summaries, he said. Prepared by my team. So you did not see the raw data? No. And you approved overrides that cleared millions of dollars? Yes. Why? The defense asked. Hale swallowed. Because I trusted the process. The jury leaned forward. Micah felt a familiar weight in his chest. He had heard these words before. From teachers. From supervisors. From men who harmed others by doing nothing loudly. Trust, Micah whispered. Without sight. The defense continued. Mr. Hale, were you under pressure to move these approvals quickly? Hale's jaw tightened. There is always pressure. From whom? The prosecutor objected. Speculation. Judge Whitmore raised a hand. Overruled. The witness may answer. Hale looked at the ceiling. Not to pray. To buy time. From above, he said finally. The room froze. Define above, the defense said calmly. Hale's voice dropped. Executives. Board interests. Donors. The words landed heavy. Micah felt the truth sharpen. This was not corruption driven by greed alone. It was obedience mixed with fear. The defense pressed on. Did anyone instruct you to approve these overrides without full review? Hale hesitated again. This hesitation was different. This one hurt. Yes, he said. A gasp moved through the room. Who? The defense asked. Hale closed his eyes. I was told it was necessary. That is not a name, Judge Whitmore said. Hale opened his eyes. They were wet now. I can't, he said. Silence fell. This was the real moment. Not when crimes are revealed, but when people decide whether to protect themselves or tell the truth. Micah watched Hale carefully. Hale was not evil. He was afraid. Afraid of losing his job. Afraid of losing respect. Afraid of becoming invisible. Micah understood that fear better than anyone in the room. Judge Whitmore spoke gently now. Mr. Hale, this court protects truth, not comfort. Hale's shoulders slumped. It was Daniel Reeve, he said. He told me the approvals were already cleared at a higher level. Micah felt the air shift. Reeve. Power had a face now. The prosecutor sat very still. The defense asked one final question. Did the defendant instruct you to override those alerts? Hale shook his head. No. The courtroom erupted. Judge Whitmore slammed the gavel. Order. Micah felt his pulse slow. The shape of the case had changed completely. The defendant was no longer the center. The system was. During the break, Micah stood alone near the windows. Rain streaked the glass like lines on a confession. Judge Whitmore approached him quietly. You were right, she said. About obedience. Micah nodded. People fear losing what gives them value. And you, she asked. What do you fear losing? Micah looked at his reflection in the glass. Nothing I don't already live without. She studied him. You've been rehearsing this your whole life. Micah did not deny it. Because this was the part no one had laughed at yet. They had mocked his voice. They had missed his preparation. And now, the court was silent, not because it was empty, but because it was listening. The next name would not be whispered. It would be spoken clearly. And when it was, everything built on silence would finally fall. The silence that followed Daniel Reeve's name was not empty. It was heavy, pressed flat against every wall, every bench, every chest in the room. Even the air seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether it was still allowed to move. If you respect stories where the overlooked rise, like this video and subscribe, because this silence matters. Micah Moore stood with his hands folded over the mop handle. He did not move. He did not speak. He watched. This was the moment courts were built for and afraid of at the same time. Judge Whitmore looked down at the courtroom. Her face was calm, but her eyes were alert now in a new way. This was no longer just a trial. It was a test. Daniel Reeve is not a party to this case, the prosecutor said carefully. His name has been mentioned without formal charges. Judge Whitmore did not look at him. His name was introduced under oath, she said. That makes it relevant. Micah felt a tight smile form inside him. Relevance was the enemy of control. The defense stood. Your Honor, the testimony establishes that the defendant lacked direct intent. Decisions were made above him, without his instruction. The prosecutor objected, but his voice lacked force. The jury watched closely now. Not confused. Awake. Judge Whitmore turned to them. You are not to draw conclusions yet, she said. But you are to remember everything. Memory, Micah thought, was justice's sharpest tool. The court adjourned early that day. Outside courtroom B, the hallway buzzed, but no one laughed anymore. Laughter had nowhere to land. Micah pushed his cart slowly, listening. This is bigger than we thought. They are going to bury it. They can't. Power always underestimated moments like this. It believed silence could be restored, that people would forget. Micah knew better. Once a mind changed shape, it never went back. In the afternoon, Judge Whitmore called Micah into her chambers. He stood near the door, respectful, quiet. quiet. You've been careful, she said. You never crossed a line. Micah nodded. Lines exist for a reason. She studied him. Why didn't you become a lawyer? The question landed softly but carried weight. Micah answered without drama. Because when I tried, I learned the law protects those who already have a voice. And yet, she said, you learned it anyway. Yes. She leaned back. You understand the psychology of power. Micah spoke simply. Power does not see people. It sees risks. And you? She asked. I learned how not to look like one, Micah said. The judge was silent for a long moment. Tomorrow, she said, Reeve will be summoned. Micah's chest tightened, not with fear but awareness. Be careful, she added. People like him do not lose quietly. I know, Micah said. That night, Micah cleaned courtroom B alone. The benches were empty. The flags still. He stood at the center of the room and spoke softly. When a court stops breathing, he said, it is because it has seen something it cannot unsee. He remembered another silence. Years ago, a smaller room, a closed door, his own voice dismissed because of how he looked, where he stood, how much he mattered. That silence had taken years from him. This one would give something back. The next morning, Daniel Reeve entered the courtroom. No smile, no smooth confidence, just tension. Micah watched from the side as Reeve took his seat, eyes scanning the room, calculating exits. Reeve glanced at Micah. For the first time, there was recognition. Not of a janitor, of a threat. Judge Whitmore called the court to order. Mr. Reeve, she said, you are here because the truth has pointed at you. Reeve's jaw tightened. Micah felt the court lean forward as one body. This was no longer a trial of facts alone. It was a trial of power versus truth. And for the first time, power did not control the room. Silence did. And silence, Micah knew, was about to speak. Daniel Reeve sat like a man balancing on glass. Straight back, hands folded, face calm. But his eyes moved too much. Left, right, exit, judge, jury, Micah. Micah Moore stood near the wall, quiet as always. But this time, the quiet was not dismissal. It was attention. Judge Whitmore fixed her gaze on Reeve. You understand you are under oath. Reeve nodded. Of course. His voice was smooth, controlled, a voice used to rooms bending. The defense began carefully. Mr. Reeve, you advised several institutions during the period in question. Yes. And you had contact with Marcus Hale. Yes. Did you instruct him to approve compliance overrides related to this case? Reeve smiled slightly. No. One word. Clean. Simple. False. Micah felt it immediately. Lies did not live in words. They lived in timing. The defense did not react. Mr. Hale testified that you told him approvals had already been cleared at a higher level. Reeve shrugged lightly. He misunderstood. Misunderstood what? The defense asked. That I was relaying information, Reeve said. Not issuing instructions. Micah watched the jury. A few nodded. The lie was working. Reeve continued, gaining confidence. I provide guidance. I don't make decisions. Guidance. Another hiding word. The defense shifted. Mr. Reeve, do you recall sending an email on March 14th? Reeve hesitated. I send many emails. The defense nodded. Let me be specific. An email titled Expedite Clearance. Reeve's jaw tightened. I don't recall, he said. Micah closed his eyes briefly. People lied most when they pretended memory was selective. The defense held up a document. This email instructs Mr. Hale to move the approvals forward without delay and states that review is a formality. Is this your email? Reeve leaned forward, squinting. It appears to be. Appears to be, the defense asked. Yes, Reeve said. But context matters. Micah whispered to the floor. Context does not change command. The defense pressed on. Did you send this email? Reeve paused. Too long. Yes, he said. But. And did you tell Mr. Hale the approvals were already cleared? I may have said they were expected to be cleared. Expected, the defense repeated. Not cleared. Yes. The defense nodded slowly. So when Mr. Hale approved the overrides, he believed clearance had already occurred. That was his assumption, Reeve said quickly. An assumption you encouraged, the defense said. Reeve's voice sharpened. I did not instruct him to break protocol. The defense turned to Judge Whitmore. Your Honor, may I ask the witness one final question? The judge nodded. The defense faced Reeve. Mr. Reeve, Why were these approvals so urgent? Reeve leaned back. Because delays can cause financial instability. For whom? The defense asked. Reeve hesitated. The room waited. For the institution, he said. Which institution? The defense pressed. Reeve's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Silence took him. This was the lie that could not stand. Judge Whitmore spoke softly but firmly. Answer the question. Reeve swallowed. For donors tied to the development project. The words dropped heavy. Micah felt the courtroom shift again. This time, deeper. The defense followed calmly. So the urgency was not legal necessity. It was financial protection. Reeve said nothing. The judge looked at him. Mr. Reeve, you leveraged authority without owning it. You used trust as a weapon. Reeve looked small now. The glass beneath him had cracked. The prosecutor rose slowly. Your Honor, in light of this testimony. Judge Whitmore raised her hand. The court has heard enough. The room froze. The evidence presented today undermines the integrity of the prosecution's case, she said. The defendant's direct intent has not been established. Micah felt his chest rise. Judge Whitmore continued. This court will issue a ruling tomorrow. People stood, whispered, moved. Micah did not. As Reeve was escorted out, he looked once more at Micah. This time, there was no anger. Only fear. Fear of being seen clearly. Judge Whitmore lingered after the room emptied. You knew where this would end, she said to Micah. Micah shook his head. I knew where it had to go. She studied him. Tomorrow, she said, the court will fall silent. Micah nodded. Because silence was no longer a weapon. It was a verdict waiting to be spoken. The courthouse was full before the doors officially opened. People stood in the hallways, leaned against walls, waited on staircases. No one spoke loudly. The building carried a low hum, like a held breath stretched too long. Micah Moore arrived at 5:12 a.m., as he always did. He mopped the marble floors slowly, the same way he had for years. Nothing about his movements had changed. What had changed was the way the space responded to him. The echoes felt closer now, as if the building itself remembered. He did not rehearse. There was nothing left to practice. By 9 o'clock, courtroom B was packed. The defendant sat still, eyes forward. The prosecutors looked tired. The defense looked careful, not hopeful. Everyone understood that hope had already done its work. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered. The room rose. When she sat, the court Saturday. Silence settled, not forced, not fragile. Complete. Judge Whitmore began. This court was asked to decide whether one man committed a crime, she said. What this court discovered instead was a system that mistook obedience for legality and urgency for truth. She paused. Evidence was shaped. Oversight was bypassed. Authority was implied where it did not exist. The jury listened without moving. The defendant, the judge continued, did not direct these actions. He did not authorize the overrides. He did not design the pressure. Micah's hands rested calmly on his cart. In light of this, Judge Whitmore said, the charges are dismissed. The words fell. No gasp. No cheers. Just silence. The kind that lands after something heavy has been set down. The defendant closed his eyes. Not in joy. In release. Judge Whitmore was not finished. This court refers the matter of Daniel Reeve and associated parties for immediate investigation, she said. And it orders a full review of compliance practices related to this case. The gavel struck. That sound echoed longer than any laughter ever had. People stood slowly. Conversations did not rush back. Some truths needed time to sit. Micah turned his cart toward the aisle. Then something unexpected happened. A juror stood. Your Honor, the man said carefully. May I speak? Judge Whitmore hesitated, then nodded. The juror looked around the room. I just want to say, we watched more than evidence here. We watched listening. He turned toward Micah. We watched a man no one noticed help the court notice itself. Every head turned. Micah felt the weight then. Not pride. Recognition. Judge Whitmore looked at him. Mr. Moore, she said, the court thanks you. No laughter followed. Only respect. Micah nodded once. That afternoon, as the courthouse emptied, Micah cleaned courtroom B one last time. He wiped the tables, straightened the chairs, smoothed the flags. Judge Whitmore entered quietly. You were never just a janitor, she said. Micah smiled faintly. I was exactly what the building needed. She extended her hand. If you ever choose to speak from the front of the room. Micah shook his head gently. Some truths work best from the edges. She understood. As Micah pushed his cart toward the exit, people stepped aside, not out of habit, but awareness. Outside, the city moved on. But inside that courthouse, something permanent had shifted. Because a man they laughed at had listened harder than anyone else. And when the court fell silent, it was not to ignore him. It was to hear the truth clearly, for the first time. The end. If this story made you stop and think, if it reminded you that wisdom can wear silence, then honor Micah's voice. Like this video to keep stories like this alive. Subscribe if you believe the unheard deserve a platform. And comment below. Tell us where you're listening from, and whether you believe truth always finds its moment.